Upfront and Outspoken with Bob Williams. If you love the Constitution,
man is not free unless government is limited.
if you love freedom,
As government expands, liberty contracts.
if you believe in personal responsibility, if you believe America is still the greatest nation on earth, then get ready for an experience you'll never forget. This is Upfront and Outspoken. Here's your host, Bob Williams.
Some folks are born made to wave the flag. Ooh, they're red, white, and blue.
And welcome back. This is Upfront Outspoken. I'm your host, Bob Williams, with you on this TGIF. And I got to say, thank God it's Friday because we've had gremlins all week. Coming to me via Skype, of course, is my guest, Jonathan Wolfman. And we're going to be talking about a recent video that came out from Anonymous. It's called Justice is Coming. Welcome back to the show, Jonathan. Glad to have you.
Well, thank you very much, Bob, and it's always wonderful to be talking to all of you out there. I am here in very overcast near suburbs of Washington, D.C., your nation's capital.
Now, Jonathan, you connected me to this, so I'm going to give you the opportunity to kind of tell the audience a little bit about how you came across this particular video and, give me a quick insight as to what you took out of this video before we air it for everybody else.
Okay, sure. I found this on one of the many, and I can't point to you to exactly which one right now, but I found the video on one of the any number of political sites that I look at, right, left, center, because as you and the audience knows, I'm interested in hearing information from every side that there is, and I found it very compelling because, when populations or when segments of populations for a long time feel that the traditional justice systems are not working or not on their side, I don't mean this decision versus that decision, but when they get a sense that the justice system is fixed, that it's rigged, when so much obvious good is not happening when it should, the gap gets filled. Like Robin Hood filled the gap. I mean, I don't know if it's right to compare Anonymous to Robin Hood, but back in old England when King Richard went away to fight in the wars, evil Prince John took over and started taxing everybody to the hilt and beating up people who, just wouldn't let him live in luxury. And then that's how Robin Hood and groups like that get together. And what's happening now is that these populations, these segments of the population, feel that the justice system just can't give them justice. And so, of course, some group is going to fill the gap, and what Anonymous is, of course, as many of you know out there, is a group of what they call hacksters. That is, these guys are incredibly well skilled in computers, and they hack. Just like in the movie, if you saw the girl with the dragon tattoo, that's who they are. These people can take your cheap or expensive computer and more or less get into any system they want. And what these guys have promised, what Anonymous has promised, is they're going to fill the gap for justice. And what they say they're going to do is get the personal information of all of the people who they believe, and who many people believe, have turned their backs on ordinary citizens in their quest for justice.
Well, let's let our audience give a listen to this video. And mind you, everybody, this is directly from YouTube. It's Anonymous, #OpAnon verdict, justice is coming. It's about 8 minutes long, so we're going to air the whole thing. So just give the whole thing a listen, and we'll be back.
esteemed citizens of the world, we are anonymous. As many Americans' eyes turn to the recent decision by the Ferguson grand jury to not indict Officer Darren Wilson, we feel that it is important to remind you of the many other important cases where rogue police officers have gunned down innocent citizens. We have already launched operations such as Op John Crawford, Op Darian Hunt, Op KKK, and more recently Op Amber Rice, both Ohio residents who were shot and killed by overzealous so-called law enforcement who believed that holding BB guns was enough to sentence them to death. These clever cops offered citizens no more than 2 seconds to put down their toy weapons, as many focus on the disproportionate number of African Americans victimized by racist rogue police officers. It is also worth mentioning those of other backgrounds such as Salt Lake City resident Dylan Taylor, who was shot and killed by police for not responding to orders quickly enough. This was because he had earbud headphones in his ears. Other well-known cases such as the killing of a homeless man, Kelly Thomas, in 2011, remind us that while certain so-called minority groups might often find themselves disproportionately victimized by racist police officers, this is a broader phenomenon, one that involves the increasing militarization of police departments and the desensitization of officers to the lives and rights of citizens. We are here to tell corrupt and homicidal members of law enforcement that they are no longer safe to commit crimes with impunity. If your own respective departments and federal agencies will not punish you, we will. You will no longer be able to lurk in the shadows. The light of justice will shine upon you and your personal information. You will not be able to live that comfortable, easy lives where you can forget about your crimes. Every day that you walk the streets, you will be recognized, and your whereabouts will be known by anonymous activists and protesters who continue to form alliances with us. Anonymous hackers will join in the massive waves of cyber attacks, in conjunction with allies and anonymous activists who take action on the streets. We will demonstrate outside of your homes and your places of work. Your personal, financial, and other most guarded secrets will be exposed. You will not be allowed to live the comfortable lives you so desire, when there are innocent lives you have taken. We call upon any honest and moral members of local and federal law enforcement to continue to assist us in these efforts. You know, as well as we do, that these rogue officers are a disgrace to your profession. Realize that even in your departments and federal agencies, there are more allies with our operations than you could imagine. Departments and federal agencies that will not punish the guilty and cover up their crimes will become a target as well. Others who join in efforts to defend murder by agents of the state, such as members of the KKK, will continue to be targets, regardless of the recent efforts to backpedal. If you do not wish to become targets, then stand on the side of justice and be on the right side of history. For the purposes of addressing some of the most recent crimes first, we will target officers who have carried out their crimes in 2014. This should not give officers who committed earlier crimes any reason to imagine that they will be spared. We will get to each of you, as this is a part of a long operation which will be carried out in waves. Some of the killer cops who we are putting on notice from the beginning of this operation are as follows. First and foremost, Officer Darren Wilson, we are far from done with you, and the prosecuting attorney Robert P. McCulloch, who went to great lengths to justify your brutality. All who are responsible for the unjust verdict, you're under our radar now, as you are so prominent on our list. Perhaps the least needs to be said about what is coming for you. Realize that you'll never live in peace. We commend the officers within the Ferguson and St. Louis police departments, who have been providing us with information. Your allegiance to justice shows us that there are still some good within your ranks, who will not go to pressure from a corrupt system. Officer Sean Williams, of the Beaver Creek, Ohio Police Department, you gunned down John Crawford in cold blood. You shot him for holding a toy gun, in a state where holding real guns in Walmart is perfectly legal. You had been advised of this before you pulled the trigger. Now you are on notice from us. The Greene County prosecutor may have chosen not to indict you, but Anonymous has indicted you. We commend Officer Darko, who accompanied you, for not pulling the trigger when John Crawford began running towards him. He saw clearly that at this point, your victim had placed the rifle on the ground. You chose then to shoot him anyway. We have no conflict with you, Officer Darko. We further comment Chief Evers for retiring from the corrupt Beaver Creek Police Department. Officers who leave corrupt departments or stand up to those corrupt officers within them have nothing to fear from us. Officer Braun Cruz, your shooting of Dylan Taylor was ruled justifiable by Salt Lake County District Attorney Singill on Tuesday. But the anonymous verdict is a very different one. You may think that the troubles you have been facing are over, but we assure you that they are just beginning. Rookie Officer Timothy Lohman. Last weekend you shot 12-year-old Timber Rice, without giving him a chance to explain that he only had a BB gun. Officer Garmbach was with you, and because of his experience on the job, he did not pull the trigger. This further highlights your overreaction. The Cleveland Police Department, however, has found themselves a target because instead of acknowledging your crime, they covered it up, lying, saying that Timber pointed the gun at you. You blamed the victim of Officer Lohman's crimes, rather than protecting him. Since you have refused to come to the defense of the innocent, we have taken up his cause. It has come to our attention that the FBI is investigating our response to your corruption. Perhaps those in the FBI who still believe in justice should focus their efforts at investigating your corrupt department. This same department recently took the life of Tanisha Anderson, slamming her on the concrete, instead of bringing the brutal officers to justice. The Cleveland Police Department has been engaged in a cover-up that consistently blames unarmed victims of police brutality for their own deaths. Boone County, Kentucky Deputy Tyler Brockman, your shooting of Samantha Ramsey has put you in our sights. Utah police involved in the cover-up of the shooting death of Darian Hunt, you have not been forgotten. New autopsy results have revealed that you shot his cosplayer, dressed as a samurai in the back. The state has refused to bring you to justice, so Anonymous has decided to hold you accountable. Other police and government agents involved in the killing or cover-up of any innocent, unarmed citizens will be subject to Operation On Verdict. You will see the results of this operation online and right in front of your houses and places of employment. This is only the beginning. We are Anonymous. We are Legion. We do not forgive. We do not forget. Expect us.
And that is the video. Justice is coming from Anonymous. Now I'm bringing Jonathan Wolfman back in here. Now, Jonathan, while I don't condone some of the actions that Anonymous does, as far as, hacking into some things, in this particular instance, they name particular officers, incidents that have occurred, and, it's surprising to me that the one that they haven't mentioned in this happened 2 years ago in Mobile, Alabama, when a black officer shot a naked 18-year-old white student who indeed was on psychotropic drugs, because running around going nuts, I guess, but shot a guy. I mean, clearly, why hasn't Anonymous mentioned this guy is what I'm kind of curious.
I think it's important to understand and I think you understand that, but I want the audience to understand I'm certainly not a spokesperson for Anonymous. I've written about them, and I find it intriguing what happens in societies when it's perceived that the criminal justice system is dysfunctional and other groups come into the breach. But what I would say about that, and I know you posted about that the other day, Bob, and I found it very interesting. I think the difference, and people can either accept that or this or not, I do think that the difference is not that one is acceptable and one is unacceptable. A black officer going after a white kid in the way you describe is utterly unacceptable. But I think what is moving groups like Anonymous is that there is a pattern of when these things happen, white on black, white cops on black boys, as opposed to black cops on white boys, it's happening more and more and more. And if in fact the criminal justice system appeared at least to be doing its job to protect ordinary black boys, then I don't think Anonymous would have a case at all. But there's not a pattern of black cops going after, or it can't really be perceived that there's a pattern. I don't think it can be reasonably perceived that there's a pattern of black cops going after white boys. If, in fact, that cop, the black cop in the Arizona case, I think you said it was the Phoenix area?
Yeah.
If, in fact, the black cop was indicted and there was a full trial, and I don't know the answer to that, then, in fact, the justice system worked. The justice system doesn't... What I'm saying, and what Anonymous seems to be saying, is not that every situation must develop into a conviction and jail time. I think what they're saying is that these situations, this pattern, is a pattern of the system saying, we're not even going to bring your cases to trial. And the overwhelming feeling among black mothers is that our boys don't count.
Well, I agree with the fact that there is a huge disparity between, black cops shooting white kids or, other races, and that it seems that the white cops shooting more blacks. I agree that there is this huge disparity, but what I guess my whole point of posting that video initially was to show that this does not just happen on one side of the table, but it does happen on the other, and that no matter if you're a black cop, Hispanic cop, Asian cop, white cop, there are always going to be bad seeds. And while Anonymous is doing what they're doing, in bringing such things to light, I've been listening to what they're saying, and they're more focused on the black, the white cop, black, suspect, and that's what's got me. I mean, if you're going to go after, targeting, what they refer to as cop killings, then they should equalize it across the board, and it seems they're not.
Well, again, I'm not a spokesman for Anonymous, but what I'm going to guess, and it's just a guess, folks, is that because they don't see a pattern of black cop, white kid killings, that their focus is going to be on the other. Now, let me just share a statistic with all of you. And it speaks to this. One of the writers who is going to be presenting a piece on my show tomorrow afternoon here on Starcom, Passionate Justice at 2 p.m. Central, 3 Eastern, is a North Carolina writer, and he's white, he's Caucasian, and he points out that, blacks are only 13% of our population, and yet they are 33% of those killed by cops in confrontations where there is no weapon in the hands of the victim. That's about three times their population. That's a serious issue. That's just a serious issue.
Earlier this week, and just I think it was yesterday, in fact, I had a couple guests on. One was Fred Brower, who was talking about this, and and he's white, and I'm not going to say he's not. He made a video called "Wake the Hell Up," and then I had Bobby Bland on yesterday, and we were talking about this. And they both came to the conclusion that when you are confronted, Bobby was kind of like, he can understand the fact that the great disparity between the white cop, black suspect being killed, and so wasn't Fred. But they both came across the thing that it's more or less responsibility that has to be held, there. And I mean responsibility on the part of the officers. It makes no difference. If the suspect is clearly a child, such as the incident in Cleveland, you don't go shooting a kid. I mean, there's better ways to, apprehend a 12-year-old than with deadly force. And there's also, every cop knows if you don't see a gun or a guy reaching for what appears to be a gun, you don't shoot. There's better ways to, detain a potential suspect, calling in other units, whatever. And they both agreed that accountability is the key factor that must be done. Would you agree that we must hold our law enforcement to a higher degree of accountability than what we are?
Yes, absolutely. And I would immediately say we have to hold black cops, Asian cops, and white cops to the same standard. And you and I are in complete agreement about that. But one of the things that that has been pointed out in the New York case, in the Staten Island Eric Garner case, is that the cop who brought this large man down, granted he was a large man, he had asthma, the asthma clearly contributed to the fact that he was, this cop has a record himself, not a criminal record, but a record of building up his paperwork on the back of really petty junk crimes like selling loose cigarettes, which is what
he also has been brought. He was also sued for a public strip search, and this officer is, I will admit, he's a bad apple in the bunch. I'm not going to deny that, but let's focus on something here, Jonathan, for a couple of minutes.
Sure.
I do want to get your impression of why why this jury in the Eric Gardner's case, after seeing this video, I mean, come on, they must have seen it unless they all decided to close their eyes. Why would this jury not return an indictment?
It's so interesting because in the Ferguson case, we now have, I don't personally, but the news media, and you have access, of course, through your sources, Bob, to all of what the grand jury saw out in Ferguson, Missouri. In the Staten Island, New York case, none of us have any paperwork. And I have to say, you saw the video, I've seen the video, we've seen it 1,000 times now. And we've seen it 1,000 times, regardless of the political slant of the kind of news we take in, whether it's Fox or whether it's MSNBC. We've seen that video, and I have to say, I am scratching my damned head, and I'm fairly bald. And I gotta say, man, I cannot fathom it.
The thing is, you're right. We did get a copy of all 24 volumes that was presented to the Ferguson grand jury, and we're still sifting through it.
Of course.
But the thing is, here is what really disturbs me. I don't know if you were listening to my show earlier, but we aired a news segment in which the individual that took the video of the Eric Gardner, the situation. I'm gonna leave it at that. The Eric Gardner situation. He was called before the grand jury. He already anticipated he would have to testify. When it came to him going up to testify, he said right out, members of the grand jury were either talking or on their cell phone. They paid absolutely no attention to what he was saying. It makes me kind of wonder where this jury was. I mean, did they decide to take a coffee break or what?
Well, if that's the case, and I, obviously that's appalling. And the other thing, I suppose, is it just strikes me that the guy who told that to the media, that these guys seemed not to be in any way interested, the jury, in what he had to show them, there's no reason for him to be lying. I can't imagine why he'd be exaggerating or lying. And so if it's the case, I suppose he could be, but I can't think of a reason why he would. And so if he's in fact at the truth or coming close to the truth or telling the whole truth about that, it seems to me that the jury is obviously derelict in its responsibility. And, as I said to you before we went on the air, the jury system is generally it's a hallmark of our democracy, and yet it's a crapshoot. We all know it's a crapshoot. You can get, I was telling Bob about a jury I was on 25 years ago or more, 30-some years ago now. I was the foreman in a rape trial in Philadelphia, and we had to... we were a hung jury. Why? The guy had obviously done it. There was no question in 11 of our minds that he did it, and yet the best dressed, most nappy, dapper fellow on our jury insisted that unless you had photographic, as he called it, photographic evidence of the rape itself, it must be it must be a setup somehow. And we looked at him as if he were mad. And after 3 days, the judge said, "Oh, to hell with this," and he dismissed our jury.
Yeah, and that's surprising. Some people, when the evidence is right there. I mean, in the Gardner case, there is a video. You hear Gardner 11 times telling the police, "I can't breathe, I can't breathe." And yet this cop walks. Now, of course, it's not over yet till the fat lady sings, because it's going under federal investigation.
That's right.
It's just the idea that how a jury, it just totally ignores video proof. It puts into question other cases where video is presented. We've seen it like with Rodney King. Remember, his beating was recorded. And now this case, other cases where cops indeed have been videotaped by somebody passing by, or happenstance being in the right place at the right time, seeing this going on, and they catch it on video. So now it's going to call all this type of proof positive evidence into question.
And that brings me to this. It seems to me, and there's no one overall solution. Better training, all of that has to happen, sure. But what if the cops in Ferguson 6 months ago had all been given GoPros and told that they were out of uniform unless they were wearing their GoPro cameras? Don't you think we would have less controversy about what Darren Wilson or Mike Brown did that day? Yes, we would. We might still have some questions. Of course we might still have some questions. GoPros are not, the jackpot answer to all of this. But, I'll tell you why I bring this up. One of the other pieces on my show tomorrow is by a guy who talks about a situation in another city in which white cops were beating on a black guy, just pounding him into the concrete in his face, and his pregnant wife, 7 months pregnant, comes to him to try to help, and another cop throws her down on her belly. She's 7 months pregnant. Anybody looking at her could see she's pregnant. And then you hear a cop behind his sunglasses scream, "Phone, camera." And they grab a phone from a onlooker who has got it, and the onlooker says, "Fine, crush my phone. It's already in the computer cloud." And that's what's going to happen more and more. Now that smartphones can instantly send your videos to the cloud, the cops, if they're smart, and departments, if they're smart, and the police unions, if they're smart, will say, "You know what, we may have to kind of get used to this, but we will wear GoPros." Because in fact, the chances of our looking bad and looking bad and looking bad get a whole hell of a lot worse the more technology moves ahead.
And the thing is, too, is, the other thing that nobody has talked about, especially with a patrol officer, is that there's a thing called a dash cam. Now, with a combination between the body cam and the dash cam, we would have seen everything that transpired. But I want to switch gears here a little bit, Jonathan, because we've only got like about 20 minutes left, and I want to get your impressions as to, should we continue with this grand jury system in a cop shooting, or should we indeed get a outside special prosecutor to handle these cases? And I'm not talking not somebody just from the state there, because that prosecutor might have affiliations, but get somebody from a different jurisdiction completely to handle this.
I wouldn't be surprised if they go to that for a while, at least because the least of the reasons would be because that's one thing that might begin to convince minority communities, and I do think they need to be convinced, that there is hope for justice. People say, well, how can we tolerate these anonymous hacksters and all that? All I want in my writing and in my talking about this is to get people to see that anonymous fills a gap. And it's a gap that, people say, how do we fix this? If no one in authority is seeming to want to fix it, other people are going to step into that vacuum. And you might not love, not you, Bob, of course, but the audience. There may be people in our audience today who think, wow, that's really cool. That's great what they're doing, threatening to expose all these rogue cops. And there may be people in our audience who think, boy, that's pretty terrible. That's an unjustified invasion of a man's or a woman's privacy. Okay, it may be. But what I would ask all of you to consider is, if you were just try to migrate into the soul and mind and shoes of a member of a community, and you have felt done to for years and years and years, and you grew up hearing stories from your granddad and your grandma and your great-grandma and dad about, boy, this is not very different from what happened to cousin so-and-so back in 1928, etc., etc. Boy, at some point you might have to have that special prosecutor just to get people to think, wow, there's a possibility that we're going to be listened to for once.
I agree that we definitely need a special prosecutor, and I'm not going to say that not. Having a district attorney who has close ties to the police department, because he depends on the police department for evidence to build cases. And if he doesn't, I guess the feeling within the blue wall, as we say, that you can depend on this district attorney to be on your side, they're going to get the impression, well, why should I even support this guy? Why should I even do this? This is why, in my opinion, we should indeed have a special prosecutor anytime that you have a police-involved shooting from someone that is not affiliated with that district or with that state, handle such cases to present it to not a grand jury, but I guess you would say a special investigative jury, where you're going to see this information, but they're going to base it on the evidence. Such as Gardner's case, had such a system been in place, I'm sure the officer would have been indicted, because everything was right there proving this officer went way beyond what he was trained to do. He broke every single policy that is in New York City, and I feel sorry for the family, for the Gardner family. I really do, because they are not seeing justice. But how many other cases are we going to have before this special prosecutor is implemented? It makes me wonder.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think it would do so much to heal just the very fact that people are recognizing this. You talk about the cops being in bed with the prosecutors in ways that sometimes are natural, because the prosecutors, as you quite rightly say, they depend on the police force for very good information, just the way, say, cops depend on snitches for, people who aren't, the kind of people you'd like to invite over for dinner and meet your daughter, but, they're useful people to cops. So I heard about the following, that the former police chief in Ferguson, and I don't know the guy's name, I only heard about this fleetingly yesterday, got on a local network in Missouri. He's an older gentleman now, and he's long retired, but he's kept his finger in the pie a little bit. And he said point blank, he's a white guy, of course, because it's Ferguson, and it's a police force, and he said, I just got to say, this is one of the most corrupt situations that anybody could ever deal with, and they do not want an outside investigation. So I have to say, you've nailed it. If you could have a combination of certain tech advances and enhancements, let's say, like the body cameras, in addition to the dashboard cameras, as you pointed out, Bob, and these independent prosecutors, what would end up happening is it would obviate the need. It would just simply take away the need for hacksters like Anonymous to say, all right, well, nobody else is doing it, we will.
I agree. I agree with that statement 100%, because that would definitely put Anonymous out of business when it comes to that.
It would, and the point is, there should look, in the best of all worlds, I think if we ever knew who was Anonymous, we don't know who they are, of course, but I'm going to bet, just a bet, that if you were to ask them, would you rather not be in business? They'd say, yeah. But we also feel a moral compulsion to do what we do in the absence of the system doing it themselves.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is it's so easy for police departments to have that body cam. I think it's like just a few $100s to have that little camera, and then the installation of a cam in the squad cars, and my mind just skipped at the name of the damn thing.
Oh, and we both know that there will be federal grants to help local police forces do that.
And this is the thing. I mean, the money would be made available, and I'm sure something like that would easily pass through both House and Senate to say, okay, we're going to fund this, we're going to do this, because we have to once again show that law enforcement can be respectable. Right now, the image of law enforcement, even good cops, are damaged to the point where, if I was a cop today, I'd be scared shitless, and I'm going to put it that way. I'd be scared shitless to go out on patrol knowing that 90% of the people I am sworn to serve and protect are going to be against me.
Yeah, and even if you weren't scared shitless, let's just say you weren't, but I think you're right, many probably are, but even if you weren't, wouldn't you just be damned embarrassed for your profession? My son, who is African American, he's a bright young guy. Everybody knows from my show that he's a marksman, he's an outdoorsman, and he's very friendly with both our black and white cops in this area. And, he just shakes his head at all this, and he just says, the cops I know, they're largely good guys. Sure, there's some idiots out there, but he says these guys are they're not so much scared, because, of course, we don't live in a deeply urban area, but he says, these guys are just embarrassed.
Oh, yeah. Other things that we're learning, too, regarding the Cleveland shooting, is that particular officer that did this, how can I put it? He had mental issues. He wasn't able to follow orders directly, even on the shooting range. Everything pointed that this rookie cop, had issues from the get-go. And yet here he is, he's called in within 10 seconds. 10 seconds from the time he pulls up, he plugs this 12-year-old boy. And his instructors already said this guy should not have been on the street. Here he was put out there. Is this what we're getting out of our academies? A bunch of loose cannons?
The notion out there, I think, in our country is that there is some level of psychological testing before you get the hell out of the academy and they put you on the street. But you have to wonder. You really have to wonder. Now, the guy in New York, the guy in Staten Island, you just get the sense about him that he was just trying to bump up his paperwork so he looks like a good guy. You just see a guy on the make, a guy who wants to make sergeant, a guy who wants to make lieutenant, a guy who wants to make captain. And he's willing to pick on, and I hate to say this, but he's just willing to pick on the most inconsequential, yes, technically criminal acts in order to boost his paperwork. And when somebody said, hey, leave me alone, he gets all in his face and does the chokehold, which, by the way, chokeholds have been illegal in New York. I'm wondering, out there in our audience, how long do you think it's been illegal in New York to use a chokehold? Well, the answer is almost 20 years. It can't be that this 8-year veteran didn't know.
Exactly. And the thing, you brought up a very interesting point about this chokehold, is that 90% of the police departments across the country, and I'm going to leave it at that because the figure might be a little bit higher, maybe a little bit lower, have banned such a hold, knowing that the risks of death to a suspect is extremely high.
And especially, if I may say, especially when we're considering suspects who are not holding weapons of any kind.
Right, and the thing is that this individual, Eric Gardner, was allegedly, and I'm going to put it that, being detained because he sold loose cigarettes, and yet they never produced the cigarettes. As far as we know, they never produced any of the cigarettes. Because even Gardner himself in the video was saying right out, he didn't do anything. He had just broke up a fight. Why don't the cops leave him alone? Even the gentleman that recorded it said that he had just broke up a fight. So here you have, an alleged act with a guy that, if I am approached by an officer, myself, if I'm approached by an officer for something I didn't do, the first thing for me says, wait a minute, guys, hang on here a second. I'll cooperate with you, but you are going about this the wrong way. I mean,
the other thing that is stunning about this, and we haven't mentioned, is in the Garner case, apparently, and through all sorts of reports, that while he was taking his last breaths on the ground, the cops didn't call the EMTs until it was too late. They were just standing around talking.
Right, and it took the EMTs, I believe, well over 4 to 6 minutes or something like that to get there. It took them an astronomical amount of time.
Yeah, they didn't have to get there from Manhattan all the way over by the ferry to Staten Island either. They actually have EMTs on Staten Island.
And this is the thing. I mean, when the EMTs got there, it was quite some time before they actually did anything. So we have culpability across the board here, but the main focus is, the cops that were involved in Eric Gardner. Not only do you have the cop placing the chokehold on Eric Gardner, but the other officers who stood by basically allowed it to occur. They should also be held accountable for the actions or their inaction, and yet we didn't see any of them brought before this grand jury thing either.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely right. I mean, what are they doing there if they are not trying to save lives?
It makes me wonder, how corrupt the New York City Police Department really is. I know there's going to be a few out there that are going to probably hate me for that, but given what I am seeing here, it's making me wonder how deep does this bad cop syndrome, and I'm going to call it that, run?
And it's really interesting because it really puts Mayor Bill de Blasio of New York in a very interesting and tight spot, because he came to office promising to really beef up and better and fix community policing, and already this morning the police union in New York has accused de Blasio, because he criticized this particular cop, of, quote, throwing all cops under the bus, which I think, okay, we understand the rhetoric of it, and we understand that the police union feels its need to talk that way. But Mayor de Blasio's in a very interesting spot right now.
Yeah, I agree. The mayor comes in on a law and order kind of ticket, saying we're gonna improve relations and all this. He has this incident. Yes, as a mayor, I would come out against the actions of the officer, and yes, I would throw that officer under the bus because the proof positive was there. And then you have the guys from the Policemen's Benefit Association, whatever the hell you want to call them. They're going to attack de Blasio because, you're throwing all officers. He's not throwing all officers under. He threw the one officer under the bus.
That's right. And let me give the audience one little bit of historical perspective. People may not know this, but former President Theodore Roosevelt, who became president in 1900, he was the police commissioner of New York City. And he took the job. He didn't have to take any job. He came from a very wealthy New York family. But he took the job only when he told the business interests in New York City in the 1880s, you know what? I'm going to clean up this mess because this is the most corrupt public institution we've got, the New York Police Department, back in the 1880s. And they said, oh, well, we don't know. They said, fine, then I'll walk away. I don't need this job. And they said, well, okay. And he cleaned it up. That's why Teddy Roosevelt, the Rough Rider, that's how Teddy Roosevelt gained his national rep. That's how he got his national cred for being a guy who could do stuff.
We've only got a couple of minutes left, Jonathan, and I definitely want to, leave people on a little bit of a high note. Although, how are you going to find something on a good note when it comes to situations like this? But I want to get if you were in the position of making the policies to stop something like this, what would be your policy to say, okay, enough?
Well, I think we have to go back to this notion of the independent prosecutor, because what you need more than anything is some reason for communities who feel that the fix is in, that maybe the fix is no longer in. And when that happens, what you said about cops now being concerned about being on the street for their own safety, that fear among the cops will lessen. That will decrease. That will abate. Why? Because everybody is feeling that they can be out more for each other and that there's not a war going on out there.
Exactly. Well, the one thing I want to get across to everybody else is that, number one, not all cops are bad. How do I know this?
Absolutely right.
How do I know this? I used to be a cop in the Army, so I do know. Not all of us that wear that blue uniform or camouflage uniform that some places require. Not all cops are bad. We have bad seeds in the major cities because of the fact, I guess, because of our training or something. But you're going to run across a couple of bad apples. Don't let the couple of bad apples decide for you that all cops are this way, because they're not. They are not.
And I want to absolutely reemphasize that. We know that. And it's important that we all know that and work together to try to fix this mess.
Exactly. And the way I see it is get the community involved. Have the cops answer to a community affairs officer. Body cams, dash cams, special prosecutors outside of the district, outside of that state. Those are things that need to be considered, and I hope Eric Holder and everybody there takes this into consideration. Who knows? Maybe President Obama is listening to us and saying, hey, maybe he's got a good idea there. Now, Jonathan, once more before I got to let you go, you do have a book. It's getting close to Christmas time. How do people go about getting it?
People can get Passionate Justice, a progressive memoir and essays, really cheap, great stocking stuffer at Amazon. And I invite all of you who are interested in these and similar issues to listen to my show, 2 p.m. Central Time, 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific, Passionate Justice tomorrow on Starcom.
Thank you again, Jonathan. Stay tuned for a minute there, Jonathan. Everybody else. It's time for me to get out of here. Stay tuned, because coming up right after NPR News, of course, is the one, the only. Ed Till will be with you till 4 o'clock. So until Monday morning, 6 a.m., this is Bob Williams. Take care of yourselves.